Facebook friends, family, here with a friend of mine. We go way back to our time in juvenile detention, actually, is where we met. Started to learn about kids and sometimes in their worst state. And so really excited to have a conversation with Percy today. And that's all this is. This isn't an interview. It's not a news story. It's just a couple friends talking. And the goal for us today is to have respectful dialogue, maybe learn from each other. My goal is to listen, certainly more than I talk, and grow as a person. And I'm hopeful that our conversation here amongst friends becomes a microcosm of what we start to do in the city as we start the healing process and start to make amends and start to align efforts and move forward together. And so, Percy, if you can, at least to the friends on my page, will you introduce yourself and a little about yourself?
Yeah, man, for sure. Well, I was born in Carthage, New York. My parents moved back here to Indianapolis when I was about 3 or 4 years old. I went to public school my whole life, was raised over on the far east side, 32nd, 33rd, and Mid-Hartford Post. Had family all over in the Park area. I went to John Marshall Arlington High School. Went on from there and went to Indiana State, where I studied social culture and theology and philosophy, and came back here and got my career started, man, in community servitude, really just trying to put on for the community, man, and do my part in making the community a better place.
Absolutely. In Eastern Star Church, I mean, you guys have developed such an influence in the city. And so for you to be in a position to be able to minister to all of those students, man, and young people and really mold and shape minds. It's kind of the reason why I am in the niche of law enforcement that I'm in. I like my time, doing things out with adults and law enforcement, but I've so enjoyed the opportunity to mold young minds as a law enforcement officer. So I feel like we're like-minded in that area. And
oh yeah, man.
It's been such a difficult time in our community. Man, my heart has been bleeding. I just been hurt at how seems like multiple sides are just screaming at each other, and I think both sides have, not both sides, or just all different sides have a narrative maybe that they want to be heard and understood and want the other side or other sides to understand. And so with the outcry that's going on in the city right now for justice and for peace and for accountability, what's all that stemming from? I mean, where is all of it coming from?
I love what you just framed with understanding, man. That's I think is a hard thing to do, especially in the age of kind of facades, right? We got the social media era where, you put your best stuff forward and that's how you want to be interpreted. But everybody gets an opinion, right? And everybody gets to stay in their little silo and have their little opinions about it. But when it becomes a true dialogue that goes to deeper levels, that's where you do see this innate characteristic of us as humans to be understood and to understand deeply. And I think that's almost you don't want to say it's a new concept for this generation, but it takes some pressing.
We're learning how to do it.
That's exactly right. And as you push into that relationship, you start seeing some sides to some people that you don't really like, you know what I mean? And that's okay. So I think just this dialogue of black people in the community have been misunderstood for a long time. In many regards, we haven't known how to speak up for ourselves, especially speak up for ourselves in a way that can bring about change, that can create that healing that you talked about. But I see now that the dialogue is coming from below the surface, and it's actually becoming a public dialogue that goes deeper than just civil rights era or, some images of Dr. King or, James Baldwin or something. So I think it is a cry for change. But beyond that, it's what you talked about. It's a cry for understanding to be established that brings healing to all of those sides. So now we can truly forge bonds and grow together as the American people, as opposed to Black America or white America or religious America. You know what I mean? So it really, like I said, it's easy to get discouraged just looking at it, but it really is a beautiful time to offer some true possibility, man.
Man, help me understand a little bit. So some of my friends, some of my black friends that I trust, that know my heart and I know their heart, and we're friends no matter what. Some of them say, Chase, the black community just doesn't trust law enforcement sometimes. Sometimes you don't get the perception that you might get in a white neighborhood where you're there to help somebody or whatever. And so then some of us in law enforcement are like, well, why would someone think that unless they know me? Or, where does some of that narrative, where's some of that thought, where does it come from?
Ooh, that's a heavy question, man. It's so much. That's a beautiful question, and I love it. It's so much in that question, but I'll be as concise as possible. Because when you go back to the roots of black people and our history coming here to America, it is really easy for us to be in our communities and not feel like Americans, right? So when you look at the history of law enforcement, not law upholders or not law supporters, right? These are law enforcers, right? So for our communities for so long, that's how it's felt. It's felt like the laws of this country weren't created for us, right? Because this country wasn't created for us. And so the enforcers are exactly that. They are the hammers, right? And their job is to hammer us into the American way that wasn't created for us. So it has created a distrust, and we don't have to go through the history and talking about, you know, the drug epidemic and the crack era, you know, the war on drugs and all of the other stuff surrounding that. So just historically, when you look at those who have kind of worn the flag and been the authority in the nation, it hasn't been someone who has upheld the position of black people in the country. So even establishing that trust, it's going to take some, you know, some dramatic efforts just to, you know, it's kind of like, you know, my last point with that would be, you know, how can you learn how to forgive and trust someone that continue to beat you, right? It's like a person who suffers domestic abuse. It's saying, you got to learn how to trust them. You got to learn how to forgive them. You got to learn that they got your best interest in mind. You're like, I want to, but every time I look up, there's a knee on her neck, right? Every time you look up, there's the brutalities coming. So it is going to take, it's going to take a lot. But I think this is what starts that conversation or continues it, so we can try to move forward.
Yeah, and you know, I have policed black neighborhoods and have had the honor of developing relationships, even with some difficult personalities, man.
Sure.
Like,
I'm
and,
sure.
and I learned a lot of that, truthfully, in my time in juvenile detention, where you know, you have
we see a lot of
you have authoritative figure white guy, you know, in juvenile detention. Sometimes that dynamic isn't much different than it is, you know, as the white officer in maybe a black neighborhood. And man, I've been in the Meadows, you know, I've been out at 42nd and Post, you know, I've been
I grew up out there,
man. I mean, I've been in some of these places, man, as a police officer, and understand how difficult even sometimes it is to unpack some of those layers of mistrust and hatred and misunderstanding even. And so sometimes one of the narratives I hear from my law enforcement friends sometimes is, you know, it's difficult when we're assigned to black neighborhoods and, you know, maybe for some people in those black neighborhoods, maybe that's not the culture they grew up in, right?
For sure.
Especially for some of us white officers. Like, for speaking on my own, I had to learn how to integrate into a black neighborhood as a professional.
Absolutely.
You know, and I had to learn maybe some cultural differences. I had to learn even how the narrative was ridiculous that I don't see color, because I do see color. You know what I mean? And if you don't see color, then you don't see the specific needs that each neighborhood, that each person might have. And man, I've come a long, long way with that. And so some of my friends were saying, hey man, we're in these neighborhoods, but then some of the black community members might say, hey, you're over policing black neighborhoods, or you're doing too much in black neighborhoods, or arrests are high in black neighborhoods. And then the law enforcement rebuttal might be, well, there are some neighborhoods in the city that are predominantly black that have a high crime rate, you know. So then we balance that dynamic a little bit. What are your thoughts?
Man, it's a complicated thing, man, and we can get into conversations about training. I mean, I love the way you even framed it in a cultural context, because we understand that. Like, for Black America, it is a big part of our necessity to have to conform to white culture, right? And to understand the cultural dynamics, the differences, and in many regards, be okay with assimilating to some degree, learning the cultural norms, understanding the way of the world. So, I mean, just having that dynamic where you were talking about training and having time to become acclimated to go into those communities. But it is a balance too, right? Because it's just going to take time. You know, there's no such thing as just saying, hey, I'm here to protect you guys, and you come in and then everything's okay. And relationally, we just, we'll open up our arms to you. So I think the idea of policing a neighborhood, policing a community, has to be embraced by the people in the community, because when we start to learn what it requires and how to police ourselves in relationship to ourselves, we take the pressure and the burden off of law enforcement to come in and have to, with force, police crime-infused neighborhoods, right? And that's something that's going to take time too, because a lot of that is pain. It's pain-induced, right? It's pain coming out. when you see that crime and that self-inflicted, this self-inflicted wounds in the black community. So it's a complex issue, man, but it is going to require some training. It is going to require some relationship building. We tried some of that with panels and stuff, but that only goes so far, man. Proximity, it has to be consistent, right?
Yeah, and man, even to offer maybe a disclaimer for myself, having these conversations sometimes are uncomfortable for me because I know that I'm going to say something, even in the course of this conversation. Somebody's going to comment on here, and they're going to say,
"So what you implying?"
Yeah, right. Well, what do you mean by this or that? And it's a risk for us to even have the conversation
absolutely
publicly, and it's uncomfortable. But I think it takes rolling up the sleeves to do the work, and not just conversation, but rolling up our sleeves to actually do the work and moving forward. And so to unpack maybe the dynamic of how we got here, man, it's going to take us longer than we got for this conversation, right?
That's exactly right.
And so whatever has happened up to this point, which, I will say specifically, the incident in Minnesota with George Floyd, I haven't seen a police officer in the entire country condone those actions. I haven't seen one. And, I think we all know that there was a culture maybe in that police department where those officers didn't stop what was going on. And I want to talk about that here in a minute, too, about how we move forward and what that looks like for police officers, but I haven't heard anyone condone that. And then we have this massive outcry nationally because of this incident. When police departments, from my perspective, and even me personally, I'm like, hey man, I'm with you. That's not cool. That's not cool. But then we have all of this in our city where we have destruction and then maybe spewing some venom, out, and people just with deep-seated hatred. So without unpacking all of that, how we got to this point, man, maybe asking you the question that's most profound possibly for our conversation is, where do we go from here? What do we do? How do we partner as law enforcement agencies, as the communities, which by the way, for those that might not know me, I don't work for IMPD. I don't work for any agency in Marion County. I'm a Marion County resident. This is where I live. This is where my city is and has been for most of my life. And so I don't represent IMPD or the sheriff's office or anyone, even though I spent time at the sheriff's office. I don't work for any of those agencies. As a community member and as somebody who's deeply concerned about our community and wanting to move forward, where do we go from here? What does that look like?
It looks like a long road. Immediately, it looks like having people galvanize around policies that truly help the law enforcement become better for the people. Of course, we're seeing the outcries about defunding police departments and then even more radical ideas about just altogether getting rid of law enforcement, right? These are people speaking out of emotion and have, whatever they're, and I'm not here to, debate, understandably, I'm not here to debate political views. People are entitled to their views, right? But I think it does call for dramatic transparency in police forces, in police precincts, in different states and regions, and that is what ultimately is going to begin to expose where the cultures are compromised. And we have to keep it real, man. There are some people sitting in major seats of influence who have some ideologies, who have been around for a long time, who have seen some things, and there are some uncomfortable conversations that myself as a black pastor in a state like Indiana, I can't stand up and say some things to the power to be and cause for some transparent conversations to be made public. I can't. I don't have the standing. I don't have the leverage within. But it is going to take for big hearts that truly have a heart for the American people to say, you know what? If we are going to do something about transforming this culture and gaining the trust of the public, I'm not even just talking about Black America. I'm talking about the public, the American people. If we are going to truly align ourselves as community servants, we have to uproot some of these old ideologies that have infested and poisoned and intoxicated the culture of these different law enforcement agencies and say, even if that means having some public conversations in panels, round circles, even if we want to see it get heated, we want to see those things called to the forefront. We want to see those officers standing around get checked. We want to hear them say, listen, man, we were fresh on the job. We were scared. We don't know how to speak up in those moments. That creates a conversation that causes the people around to encourage them and empower them and say, yeah, but we're depending on you too, right? So I just think having those public conversations among law enforcement officers and then letting the public see those moments will empower the cultures to change. And now we can at least have some hope to say, okay, now how can we stand together to move forward policies and to get training and get funding for training so that we can really make some progress on this thing. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be a short road, but there's some hope in having those conversations and bringing about transparency.
Man, several years ago, I was commenting on one of these social media posts, and it was around the idea of implicit bias.
Yeah, man, that's a heavy topic, bro.
It is, and implicit bias in law enforcement, everyone is doing it. Not everyone, I shouldn't say that. Most major municipal departments are doing some type of training around implicit bias.
Because people are do it.
Yes.
And people are police officers are people.
Absolutely. For some police officers, man, it's uncomfortable because for those that may not understand what implicit bias is, it's like this undertone of, well, you're racist if you have implicit bias. And so and that's not the case, right? So it's this whole unpacking of what implicit bias is, understanding that we all have it, even if it's not related to race or not. But I had to check myself, man, and I'll tell you just with me personally, it maybe is a microcosm of some other officers and maybe even some departments I know, as I was commenting on social media around this idea of implicit bias. I didn't understand it at the time.
Sure.
And what I was saying was ignorant. It was ignorant. And I had two mentors of mine. Both of them were black officers. Both of them. They essentially said, "Hey, dummy, let's go meet up and talk about this. let's go talk about this, dummy, because you're wrong, right?" And one of them was a mentor of mine who taught me a lot about law enforcement. The other one is currently working in Marion County right now in a leadership position and runs his team well. I respected both of them. And so really, we actually were supposed to have maybe 10, 11, 12 people show up. And it was just me and the other two, my two black officer friends that were my mentors, just us three. But man, starting to unpack that, and I came in maybe not as open-minded as I should have been, maybe a little bit more of a combative posture. But we really started to talk about what implicit bias looked like, and then start to talk about some acute examples of how that might play out in law enforcement, and then what their experience was, and then looking at these two men that I respect, saying, man, I can't tell them what their perception is, or I can't tell them what their perception is right or wrong. You know, that's their perception. And then when I start to look at it maybe from the lens that they're looking through, start to understand a little bit more of it. And so then I started to educate myself. I read some things that some of it I agreed with, some of it I didn't.
For sure.
I started to listen to people. Some of it I agreed with, some of it I didn't. But as a person, I wanted to pursue that education. And then I see this trend of more departments starting to integrate in implicit bias. If I can be real with you for a minute, and some people are gonna get mad at me about this, but it is what it is, man. Implicit bias in law enforcement training is often, not everybody, but often, it's a check the box superficial training, or we call it cultural diversity. You know what I mean? We talk about, and we don't talk about black people the whole time, but even though here in Marion County, that's a lot of the neighborhoods that we're gonna work in, we talk about everything. And all of that's important, it is. We have to be culturally competent in whatever culture, whatever neighborhood we're called to serve in. But it's check the box training, man, and it's not
not good enough,
it's not an ongoing conversation from my experiences, by the way. But man, the shift, I think that even in IMPD, one thing that I really respect about their leadership, I think that they have at the top right now, I think that some of their leaders are doing an incredible job. And I don't know very many of them personally. I've interacted with them professionally. But man, some of them are incredible. You know, Chief Taylor, man, Kendall Adams. These guys have changed in ranks since I was here, so I don't want to. I don't want to necessarily insult them. But Josh Barker and Chris Bailey, you know, that's their intention. Is for officers to be trained better, and even in my own department, where now I have a little bit of influence on how our officers are trained.
Absolutely.
You know, that's starting to become a real part of training, and not just hey, let's go check the box and move on.
That's
right.
not good.
And what I'm saying is, I think that's because of the constructive discourse that our society has gone through since Ferguson to now.
Yes, sir.
We're at this place where now law enforcement officers are taking that training more seriously. You know, then we get into where do we go from here from the law enforcement side? And Percy, I think my confession is, police departments have tried to hire people in the past based on some data, so they can't be accused of nepotism, so the intention is good. But we have this written test, right? If you're a good officer, but you're not great at taking tests, you don't move on, right? Then we have another part that's an interview. And if you don't answer these questions in a certain way, you might be a great officer, but you're not gonna move on through the process because you didn't answer these answers, and so you didn't get the score to move on.
Man.
You know, God forbid if you had a criminal record. And again, we have some accountability as police officers. We can't have former drug dealers very often.
Absolutely.
Police, you know what I mean? But we've had data-driven hiring processes. I think police departments, at least my focus as a law enforcement leader, is in two areas. How we properly select, how we carefully select the people, the good people that we want to be police officers, right? And around that is how we compensate them, because if you want good professionals in the business,
you got to compensate them accordingly, absolutely.
If you can go work some other job that's not very difficult to get, making more money than a police officer, man, you're just not going to get the best professionals.
Yes, sir.
And that's what we need in our community.
Absolutely.
You know? And then the second thing, other than careful selection, is specialized training, man. Intentionally crafted for specific cultures, for specific neighborhoods that we serve,
That's
for
key.
specific officers.
Super key.
We've got to have specialized training for our officers who work. And man, the way the municipal budgets work for police departments is often training is the first to get cut because it's not mandatory, right? Like we have our annual mandatories, but it's check the boxes, move on training, right? It's not good quality training, and training is expensive. And so when we talk about those two things as far as careful selection and specialized training, you know, when I hear defund the police, I hear this.
I hear you.
You're not getting what you want. We're not getting, as a community and as a police department, neither of us are getting our intended outcome. What we really want are police officers who are good people.
Absolutely.
And who are correctly and properly trained to do the job they're supposed to do. And so, man, we've got to change the way we train. We've got to get better at the way we select. And I hear you on accountability. I think our law enforcement officers want that too, because nobody hates bad cops more than good cops. It's just the case. You know, we think of we think of what happened in Minneapolis, and these officers are like, "You dummy! You know how difficult you made my job."
That's exactly right.
When I show up,
that's exactly right.
You made my job difficult.
That's right.
In our departments, though, this is where it's been difficult for me as a young officer. I remember seeing some older officers do some jacked up stuff.
Sure.
And maybe like those two officers in Minneapolis, I'm gonna get in trouble for this in Percy, but I'm gonna say it.
You be all right, man.
Maybe like those two officers who are still in training in Minneapolis, I can relate because I see some dumb stuff happening. The culture of my department at the time was not to speak up and say, hey, that's not cool. Knock it off. We talked yesterday, you know, we gotta establish this knock it off culture. When we see something as police officers that's not right, it's gonna reflect poorly on us. In fact, our job's at stake too. If we don't step in and say, hey, knock that off, man, that's not gonna work. Cut it out. And so I hear you on accountability. We, in law enforcement, if I can confess to you, Percy, we have this, we do have a tight brotherhood, you know, or sisterhood. We have this tight fraternity. But even my own brothers that are my own blood, they're doing something stupid, I'm gonna tell them about it. Because we're close enough. I can say, hey, dummy, that's not cool. We can still be cool. And so, and I don't have those answers, man. I'm not an expert. I don't know what that looks like to move forward. And so I think maybe that's where we take the advice of the community and listen to, you know, what accountability looks like, what transparency looks like. And I wanted to ask you to expound on that a little bit. Is what makes a community comfortable when we talk about transparency and accountability? What are you saying specific? What does that look like? It makes it feel better.
You know, you just framed it, man. Like that is it. The problem is everything that you just said here. Most people in the general public don't understand fully how that works. Right? We like the end result of stuff. We don't really know. Like we don't like to read instruction manuals. We want to just try to put it together. We don't really want to see how it plays out. Processes, even political process. Let us just go vote. We don't know how fully, you know, when a city county council meeting, how they propose laws. We don't know what that process looks like. So I think understanding what budgets look like, how budgets get allocated to what training, just the revelation to say, oh, did you check box? Oh, that's what the interview? Oh, we need that to change. You know, now we can start to have some real formidable solutions around kind of framing that piece, man. But the problem is so complex. But when you have guys like yourself that understand the inner workings, it creates a situation now where you can get some accountability from within that extends out into the community. Now we can say, I mean, if we talk about using our tax dollars, then you say, okay, we want our tax dollars to make sure that this is the product that we get in on the back end for our own safety, for those officers' safety, for the reputation of what, you know, all this stuff means. So it's complex, man, but I think the way you're framing it really brings us to a place where we can truly see what it's going to require from within. You know what I mean? Yeah,
I think something that we all have to get better at, all of us, is asking questions more than being experts.
Absolutely right.
You know, I have been criticized in the past for having these ideas about how we can fix the black community. I'm a white male, man. Right. You know, I've been accused of this, and I again, in my own ignorance, I have these ideas about how we as society, or even in government, or how the police department can make the black community better, right?
Yeah.
And then some of my close friends who are willing to check me say, man, we appreciate your partnership, but that's what it is. You're not prescribing something to the black community.
But that's the problem. Y'all think y'all in control, and y'all think that y'all the answer, but that's mutual. Because we see those same problems that have been killing and holding our community down, and we say, what are we going to do to go in here and fix this white country and go fix these white, but what you're talking about is innate. It has to be something that says from our own family, because me as a stranger going to tell somebody, knock that off, you need to stop doing that, you need to respect, they're going to be like, bro, I don't know you like that. For it to be their family member or somebody who respect to say, hey man, look, man, that's unacceptable, bro. We got to fix this, man. I love you, and that's why I'm checking you on this. That has a different weight. So that's why it has to be people who empathize, understand, feel convicted, and say, man, we got to fix this thing. Then they go and check their brothers and sisters, man. So, yeah, you hitting it right on. So it's mutual. It's not just,
I think that reciprocal is true, too, for even the police department. As we were talking, I got to think about that. Wasn't my point at first, but kind of hit me, too, is, man, we talked about defund the police. We don't want to fund the police anymore, but then we talk about the importance of two things that cost a lot of money, like
training and where.
Yeah, I think some of the frustration from law enforcement officers is, man, we get this outcry sometimes or this criticism of what you're doing is wrong or what you did in this incident is wrong, even though the community might not have the context to criticize what that police officer did is right or wrong. And so here is where that dialogue, right, that mutual conversation happens, where our police departments are intentionally educating the community about why we did what we did. And when we're wrong, say, man, we're wrong.
Yeah,
but,
for sure.
But here's why we did what we did, or here's why that person did what we did. And so it's incumbent upon the police department to build the trust, to give us that voice, to say, man, just trust us in this incident. And I don't want to get into the incident, but I think of Sean Reed, right, where I felt like automatically, because of years of distrust in the community, it was automatically maybe assumed that the police were lying or whatever.
Right.
And again, we don't have to get into the details of it, but for us as law enforcement community to build the kind of trust for the community, we say, look, we hear you, we hear your concern. Let us figure out if what we did was right and wrong, and let us educate you about maybe how these situations happen, so that you have a better context. And use of force is always that messy, thing that's not it's not always linear.
It's always going to be.
And so I know that that's imperative for us as a law enforcement community to build that trust, to have the voice, to be able to say, trust us. Let us investigate it. We're going to be transparent with you. We're going to hold officers accountable if they're wrong, but trust us. And I know that doesn't happen overnight, right?
No, it doesn't.
Trust happens over a long period of time. And so, we want to, as law enforcement leaders, we want to hear what the community's saying. We want to build trust to the extent possible. I just think that reciprocal is the case. We can't go into the black community and say, we're going to police the black communities, and here's what you need, here's what you all need to fix. And then same, from the community saying, hey, law enforcement community, here's what you all need to do to fix the police department, because it just seems inappropriate on both angles. But that, I don't know who the Greek philosopher is. I sound smarter than I am trying to say it, but they talk about this idea of the golden mean, right? That there's a dichotomy to everything. You have extreme here, extreme here. When we live in that golden mean and we hear from both sides to figure out what that golden mean is, then we can move forward. And
absolutely.
So, man, I guess maybe your final words of wisdom to wrap up the conversation is, as a law enforcement community, how do we build trust moving forward? What are some tangible action items that we can do to build trust with our community in Marion County, in Hendricks County, in Hamilton, wherever we are, in the state? How can we, as law enforcement community, tangibly build trust with community members and move forward with transparency?
Man, it's going to take some dramatic actions. I'll tell you that. Like dramatic and critical circumstances like these are going to call for some dramatic and critical response from law enforcement. And some of it is just probably not what law enforcement want to hear. We see snippets of it when we see law enforcement taking a knee with the people, right? Laying their gun down or taking their helmet off and then coming and making themselves proximate and vulnerable and kneeling before the people. I think that's a beautiful picture, a microcosm of what we have to see from law enforcement across the board. Seeing them lay their weapons down, really kind of, I'm speaking in parable, if you will, but get on their knees before the public and say, look, man, we are jacked up. This is same is true for some of the things that white America has to be able to bring themselves in humility to do before black America. Like a lot of the ways that y'all, it's not y'all's fault. And we earned this hole we're in. And all of us didn't do it, but we are one, like you talk about. This is a fraternity. We are brothers and sisters in law enforcement. So seeing that picture of the law enforcement, the governors and all the powers that be say public, we accidentally forgot to make ourselves a servant. And we've tried, but we've messed up.
Yeah.
And here are some dramatic ways that we want to try to make ourselves a servant to you once again.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy. And some people would outright say, man, that's not what we're here to do. We did enforcement. This is our country, and we're going to do it this way. And if y'all don't want to hear it, we're going to bring the batons back out. Nonetheless, while they doing that, you have to have that critical mass of the officers to say, well, y'all do what y'all going to do. But we represent law enforcement too, and we are submitting to the people like we should. So it's going to have to be dramatic, man, but I believe it can happen.
Yeah, me too. Percy, I've been so encouraged by some young leaders in the community, young leaders, even in our local government here, young leaders in law enforcement who get it, you know, who, and maybe even if they don't get it, are willing to.
Yes,
you know,
that's right. Yeah, they're open to learning it.
Man, I haven't always gotten it, and I
Yeah.
still don't. And man, if I can admit maybe to anybody that is watching, man, I'm broken. I don't
Yeah.
have it all together.
Yeah.
I still have a long way to go to learn.
Likewise.
Man, and I've said some stupid things in the past. I've done some stupid things, and I'm going to again. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
am
yeah.
broken. And I want to learn, but I'm also kind of here willing to roll up my sleeves. And that's the phrase I keep using, man, because it's messy. It's not clean. It's going to be dirty work. And,
Yes, sir.
I'm willing to do that work, and I am encouraged by these young leaders, you know, who are wanting to do the same. And there are some good older leaders too, man, that I'm still mentored by in the community and law enforcement.
Likewise.
I'm still mentored by
Yeah.
these older leaders, and some of them are really good.
Yeah.
But I think there's a new wave of leadership that's coming as
Absolutely.
well, and that's
Absolutely.
encouraging to me. Even you, man, and your friendship, and I appreciate you so much, man.
Likewise,
having
brother.
this conversation with me, and I love you, man. I love our community.
Yeah.
I want it to heal, and if we can be any part of that at all, man, I'd love to. And so I guess, man, telling you too, if there's anything that I can do to do this work with you, to unite our community, to unite our profession and community, I want to do that with you, man. I'm kind of here and offer myself up to you, man. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you. And,
Likewise, bro. Let's do it, man.
yeah,
Be
so,
the change.
yeah, man. Well, for anybody who's watching, really appreciate it. And Percy and I, again, are here because we want to make things better. And so if you have any thoughts from me, I'm going to put Percy on the line. I mean, he's got a real important job. But for me, man, if there's anything that I can do maybe to address, to understand you better, to help you understand what I do better, I would really appreciate that opportunity. And so thank you all for being with us and tuning in. So
For sure.
all right. Thanks, guys.
Peace and God bless, man.